Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking about applying cinematic techniques to games with Jonathan Dueck.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delmenthal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Jonathan Dueck. Jonathan is a freelance director and editor in the film industry and has graced us, joined the game industry for a moment here to teach us how to add cinematic techniques to our video games. Jonathan, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch here today?
I'm in Sweden, so I had lunch like 5 hours ago, and I had pumpkin soup.
Oh, wow. That's a good answer. Usually, it's almost always just like coffee or a sandwich. Pumpkin soup is pretty solid, very hearty, healthy.
Yeah, we have a cafeteria where I work, or where I sometimes work, and they come up with a lot of good stuff.
Nice. I miss having a cafeteria. My lunches generally consist of nothing or like Dunkin' Donuts. I'm very healthy and hearty myself.
That sounds good, though.
Definitely. Well, welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank
we
you so
love,
much.
absolutely. We love bringing in people who have, alternative perspectives to what we typically talk about on the show. So it was cool to get your prompt to talk about cinematic techniques. That, of course, is a huge part of the game industry already, has been for some time, but is a part of the industry even more so on a daily basis. I actually had the privilege to go and see a talk about establishing the tech background for the cinematics in Baldur's Gate 3 at GDC this year. And it was really cool and intensely complicated. My God, it took them a long time to get it working. And it's kind of intimidating. So, Jonathan, before we talk about that, though, we got to start with the origin story. So tell us where you are today and how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, it started. I don't even know when it started. But I do know that it started with a game. Because like as a kid, I really loved stories. But the first time I actually felt like I want to make stories myself was when I played Knights of the Old Republic 2. And I suppose I was like, I don't know, maybe 10 years old. And I was so blown away by that game and how it made me feel. And I just thought that this is so much cooler than all the stuff I watched before, like Disney movies and things like that. And I just felt that I want to make other people feel the same thing. But I guess I wasn't very smart when I was a kid because I didn't realize how games were made. I just thought they popped out of nowhere. Like I didn't know what coding was, or so I thought basically it was animation. Like you would animate every possible scenario, and people would just trigger different animations. That's how I thought about games. But to me, in my mind, it was like a movie, and I had a camera at home. So I thought, if I don't know how to make games, then at least I can start making movies. So I did. And then when I started high school, I chose like it's not exactly a film subject, but there was a lot of media stuff when I went to high school. And I started making movies, and I also started my company when I was 17 with two other friends, and we started making like local commercials and things like that. And then I did that for I think like 2 years. Then I got really fed up with making films, or at least not films that satisfied me. Like it was local commercials. So I went to Norway for a few years. I worked at an airport, and then I was like, I want to do marketing. So I got into marketing school. After a year, I felt like this is so not what I want to do. So instead of looking for marketing jobs, I started looking for film jobs, and I was super lucky. I got a permanent position, which just doesn't really exist in our industry. Like everybody is a freelancer. And they made commercials a little bit more high end, and they also made documentaries. So like my first assignment was to edit a documentary, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But I liked it, and I learned a lot from that experience. And then eventually they had to let me go, because, like I said, permanent positions are too good to be true, I guess. And I just kept making documentary films. And after making quite a few, I said to myself that I want to make my own documentary. And I started looking for different topics. And I suppose that I looked for a lot of game related things, because I started getting like Facebook ads for lots of game related things like schools. And one of them was a place called Spelkollektivet in Sweden, which is a co-living space for game developers, mainly indie game developers. And the concept was just mind blowing to me, like that this could actually work. Like you live and work with people who love the things you love. So I called James, who is the founder of Spelkollektivet, and he was immediately like, yeah, come down here. And 1 week later, I was there. And I guess now, 5 years later, I finished the movie, and that's where we are today.
Wow. That's awesome. The I'm pretty sure Spiel Collectiva was on. I think we've worked with them before. Were they on like
Oh
a
yeah.
big marketing competition? There was like a marketing campaign competition maybe a year or two ago. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'll DM you later.
Not that
Let's
I
not.
know of.
Let's not worry about it. I'm pretty sure we have actually had them on as a judge for one of our pitch nights. So that's really, small
Oh,
world.
cool.
Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, very cool. I love the quote. "This is not what I want to do" is the origin story of so many game developers, because much like film, actually, this is one of those dream industries that people, sort of don't believe is a real pathway because it is so arduous and because there just aren't that many roles. And much like film, we're moving more towards like freelancer than permanent hires, or at least project based rather than permanent hires. So I just, yeah, no matter who you are, there's often a touch point moment where you go, I don't really want to do this anymore. I just want to make games. So I love that you had that moment too.
Yeah, I think it's healthy to try other things, and like the worst case scenario, you find out that you did love what you were doing before, or you love something else. I just see positives.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Either you have discovered a whole new pathway for life, or you go back. Not the end of the
Yep.
world.
Uh-huh.
So you heard it here. That's actually the end of the episode. Take risks. Go for it. We believe in you.
Yeah.
All right. So bringing a little bit of cinematic goodness here to the indie game world. So the primary listener here in this podcast is people who are either currently trying to break in, they're just getting started, or they're running their own studios or dream of one day running their own studios. So these are typically low budget peeps. We're all doing it indie. Our blood is purple. Teach us, please, Jonathan, how do we add cinematics to our indie games?
Yeah, and I think I need to preface this by saying that I have never worked in games. So this is all from a filmmaker's perspective. And so, I mean, it's just what I see when I play games. I love games and I love storytelling. So I think a lot about the storytelling when I play games. But I guess, like, first we need to establish like what is cinematic, and the answer to that is like nobody knows what cinematic is. There are hundreds and hundreds of ways of making something cinematic, and it's the same for film. But I think there are like three main principles that to me stand out when I feel that something is cinematic. It's usually one of these three things, and the first one is storytelling, which I know is like it's such a buzzword now. Like in every industry, you're talking about storytelling. It was the same when I was studying marketing. Like we were talking about storytelling. And I was like, what storytelling? Like the story of how I buy a Coca-Cola? I don't know.
We're
But
gonna start the storytelling lunch hour podcast next. Applies to everything.
But I think like mediums that can't survive without good storytelling is film, it's games, and it's books. Like you can say that music is about storytelling, but you can make a good song without really telling a story. Um, and to me, what storytelling is, it's it's much simpler than people want to make it out to be. Like just everything needs to make sense. And in a film, it's you need to understand why the character is doing what it's doing. Then you can have your different interpretations of what that means, but everything needs to make sense. And uh, Trey Parker, Matt Stone, who are the creators of South Park, they have a talk about this that is like it really boils it down and is eye opening. And they say that you need to write out all the scenes that you have, and every scene between each scene you can never say and then. So for example, the story of how I got home from work today was I left work and then I got in my car and then I was home. That's not a story. What
At
it
least
needs
it's
to
not an
have.
exciting one.
No, no, I know. So what you need to have between every scene is either but or therefore. So if we take that same story of me going home from work, it's I was going to my car, but my car was gone. Therefore, I started looking for my car, but it just goes on like that, and then you suddenly have options instead of like if I say the story is I'm going from work to home, and I don't have that many options. But if I say but the car was gone, now it can be anything. It can be, I don't know, a story about aliens who abducted my car. It can be a story of how I'm a very forgetful person and I don't remember where my car is, uh, and then that causes more problems in my life. Um, so, so yeah, everything needs to make sense, and that sounds very easy in theory, but in reality, it's kind of hard because there's a lot of things that can get in the way, and one of the main things is the human factor, right? uh, I want to make something cool, and therefore I will compromise, and I will make the storytelling less I don't know, less good, I guess, just to get this cool thing in. um, So yeah, and then there's like a lot of other stuff that can elevate a story from there. Like you have cinematography, you have acting, you have music, you have sound, but the story needs to be there at all times. Like nothing else is really important except for that. Um, and I think it's very obvious in a game like, let's say, Sekiro, where you have a lot of boss fights. And to me, part of the reason why I like persevere through that game, because sometimes you just want to stop playing it, is because um, like every fight makes a lot of sense. Like you know why you are fighting this boss, and you know what's at stake and what will happen if you lose in the game. I mean, nothing actually happens, but yeah. So it's just about like keeping people engaged.
It's
And the
funny you
second thing,
mentioned that. It's funny that you
yeah.
mentioned that. I stopped playing Elden Ring recently, and it wasn't because it was too hard. I had just beaten. There's a pair of Crucible Knights for anybody who knows Elden Ring enough to know what that means, and I had beaten them. It was one of the hardest fights I had done yet. It took me like 50 tries or something. And I got to another boss that like was just sort of a throwaway, like non-important boss, and it beat me the first time. And I just put the game down. I was like, I don't. I like just dealt with this. I don't want more of this, and left. I think if it had
Yeah,
been somebody important, if it was Radon or something, I'd probably still be playing. But this like no name loser who beat me, I was yeah, I lost the thread.
yeah, and I think that that's like a big difference between Sekiro and Elden Ring is
Mhm.
a lot of the fights in Elden Ring don't make a lot of sense. Like there's these fights where you go into a sort of ring and you fight some type of memory, I don't know. But you have no history with that memory. Like
Mhm.
you barely know who it is. Like you have to find some obscure book somewhere else to find out who am I even fighting. And after a while, I just stopped doing those fights because then it just becomes a grind. Like I have to beat this boss, and it's super hard, and I don't even know why. Basically.
Mhm.
Um,
You were about to say your second point, I think, after storytelling.
oh yeah, yeah. The second point is establishing a universe and sticking to its rules. And
Mm.
this is something I see in short films, and games are much better at this, but I see this in short films a lot. Like you have rules for your universe, and then you're not sticking to them. Like let's say a game like Hollow Knight is really good at having this universe. Like to me, it's a cinematic experience, even though like there's not a lot of dialogue and things like that. Because I am so invested in the universe that they present to me. Um, and it's everything from the colors to the attacks of the enemies. Like an enemy can do, like every time you meet a new enemy and the enemy does something, you're surprised by the attack because you haven't seen it before. But you you just accept that attack even though it's like throwing I don't know, I can't think of a specific attack now, but they stick to their rules. Like if somebody would come in with a machine gun from a helicopter, then they would break those rules. So I stay in their universe the entire game, and that's what makes it cinematic, basically.
We ever side question there, is there ever
Mhm.
a it feels like the answer to this is yes, but I'm curious your thoughts. Are there moments where we intentionally break the rules of our universe ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marvel does that a lot,
Hmm.
and in anime they do it all the time.
Hmm.
Like they suddenly present something new that you had no idea about, and sometimes it works really well. I'm not a big fan of Marvel, so I don't think they do it very well. They just present something new, and
New cool
we
big
just have
thing.
to. Yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Now time travel
Uh,
is a thing, which answers all problems, but we're just going to forget about it.
yeah, and to me that's just not bad, but at least lazy writing.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. It's kind of the same with. I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here now, but the Dragon Ball
Hmm.
is like I loved it
Infinite
when I
power
was a
scaling.
kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible, really. Like every time they are presented with a new problem, then they solve it by throwing in all these things that we had no idea even existed.
I love that in Dragon Ball. Okay, so I love Dragon Ball Z and I love anime and I love the infinite power scaling and it's ridiculous and I know it. But just to point, just to echo your point for a moment, I love the fact that we had Super Saiyan and man, that was so cool. And then we got all the way up to Super Saiyan 3 and we were like, yeah, that's still pretty cool. And then we got Super Saiyan God and we were like, wow. And then next step after Super Saiyan God was Super Saiyan Blue. Now we're blue.
I
And
lost
that's
track.
better than God. Okay.
Yeah, I read the manga up to like 3 years ago when I was like, I can't keep track of this anymore. So, yeah.
I still appreciate it, but yeah, I understand. Awesome. So we've got storytelling and then establishing a universe and sticking to its roots. What's our third tenet here?
It's sound. And sound is my favorite one. I mean, storytelling is a favorite one too, but it's so crucial and everybody thinks about it. But sound is to me like the real hero of making cinematic experiences. And what's really cool about sound is that it's not like cinematography or animation or things like that, where the entry level to sound is very low. Like you can make good sound with very little knowledge and very little resources. But to make like exceptional sound, then you have to be an expert, of course. But the entry level is like much lower, at least to me. And a great example of that is, and something that like everybody can learn from, is watching the film Dune in a theater, because they are using the sound in that movie in a way that to me is mind-blowing. Like you could close your eyes and still have almost the same cinematic experience, because you will get images in your head from the sound. So when I watched it in the cinema, I watched it at home like the day after, just to watch it with my television speakers, and it's not the same experience at all, at least to me.
It's really true.
Yeah.
First time you hear like the Sardaukar chant is just incredible. If anybody hasn't seen Dune, it actually is still in theaters here and there, so maybe go find it. At home it'll be great too, but I totally agree. It is mind-blowingly beautiful in theaters.
And I suppose like an example of a game could be Firewatch. It was the same thing there. You could play that game with your eyes closed, almost, because just the experience of hearing all the sounds is just a story in itself. And as an editor, which I also am, I sometimes finish an edit and I'm like, okay, this is all right. This is the best I could do. And then the sound people get the movie and they put in like all the sound mixing and the Foley and the sound design. And it just elevates it to like, I'm almost ashamed to say that I edited this, because I feel like their contribution is so much more important than what I did. Yeah. So yeah, those are the three main principles to me.
Yeah, it's kind of I'm curious if this is true in the film industry as well. In the game industry, audio often gets like the shit end of the stick. Audio is almost always subcontracted out, so there's very few in-studio roles for audio, which means they're almost always outsiders. They aren't actually getting to hang out with the team and communicate with the team and be a part of the creative process. And then when they are brought in, they're almost always brought in last minute. Like, I don't know how many game jams I've been a part of, like hackathons for games, where 15 minutes before the deadline we're like, oh yeah, we've had composers making cool music this whole time and we have to plug it in now, and we get like one of their tracks in out of the 15 that they made us. And it just seems like audio is almost always this afterthought. But then if you asked anybody, I think almost literally anybody in game development, they would say audio is one of the pivotal like aesthetic cornerstones of a game. So I'm curious, yeah, I guess is that true in film as well?
Yeah, absolutely. To give you like a real life example, is I edited a documentary for TV, and I spent, I think, 5 months editing it, and then the sound guy had 1 day to do the sound.
My God.
Yeah, which is like, I would be happy to give him like at least 2 weeks of my time. Because it's so important, and like he didn't have much time. Also, like it's a waste of his expertise. He didn't have enough time to do anything else than a simple sound mix. Like he couldn't do Foley, he couldn't do any type of sound design. And yeah, so it's the same. Like no time, no money to do it, and yet it's still so important. So yeah, it's the same in the film industry.
You heard it here first then. Be nice to your composers and SFX people and give them a hug and give them more than a day. make cool
Yep.
sounds in your game.
More than a day.
More than one day, at least 2 weeks. More than that. Awesome. All right, so we'll get to community questions here in just a second, but before then, these three pillars for creating cinematics, the sort of like three pillars of cinematics, are storytelling, establishing universe, and sound. I'm curious, you're in the film industry more than the game industry, but I'm curious, especially for these indie games, these smaller budget games, what are some of the ways you've seen those three pillars successfully implemented? Could you give us any tips?
Yeah, I can give you. I can go back to Hollow Knight again. For example, they are doing a great job of using sound in the game. I haven't actually finished that game, so I can't say much about the storytelling. But from what I've seen, like the storytelling is good as well. Like there's a reason why I go. I leave like the surface world to go down. And what other indie games do we have?
Just games in general, if you have any good ones, but indie's preferable.
Yeah. I don't think I can think of another indie game right now, but yeah, basically like
If anybody in chat has great examples of indie games with strong use of these three pillars, storytelling, establishing universe, or sound, I'd love to see them in the chat.
but I mean Disco Elysium, yeah, I haven't actually played Disco Elysium, but I have watched it a lot, and they are the same, and even like they make good use of the sound, and also like dialogue is a very important factor in their storytelling, which I mean it's quirky, it's funny, and it's good, and it's the same for that as well. Like everything makes a lot of sense. You know why you are doing the things that you are doing, and I think that's like the most important thing to me as a consumer of games. It's just that I like I said, I haven't played Disco, but I watched a lot of videos, which in itself says something. Like I'm invested enough to not even play it myself, just watching it, and that still keeps me interested.
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples that people are dropping in the chat. Amnesia, Celeste, Rain World. I've been playing a ton of Phasmophobia, if you're familiar with that game. It's a little bit older and a little bit, as far as it goes, a little bit jankier of an indie game. But it did remarkably well, and it's really the reason that Lethal Company exists, which is such a big hit recently. And Phasmophobia, I would not say has mastered any of these three elements, but it has wound up doing an incredible job of these three elements. Phasmophobia has you and the other players in the squad acting as ghost hunters in a house, and you're trying to detect which type of ghost is in this house, and that's your whole objective. You don't actually have to deal with them, so it's sort of like this mystery game. You're like putting together different pieces of evidence. Oh, we saw a heat signature on the wall, and that means it has to be this category of ghost, that kind of thing. And it sort of naturally creates really powerful story beat moments. You'll turn on a light switch and the ghost will instantly turn it off, and everybody will freak out and run out of the house, because the ghost can kill you if you're not careful. And then sound in particular, once you really understand the mechanics of the game, it's really quite simple. They're not doing anything overtly complicated to get what they've managed to create. For instance, it's like, when the ghost makes this sound, it's literally just triggered by like you looking at the ghost, because the ghost is always there. It's just an invisible body. So it's not like they're really choreographing important cinematographic moments. It's literally just like somebody put in a line of code, like when you look at the ghost, play this sound. But it still winds up creating these moments of like high frantic fear that I think it's achieved remarkably well. There's a reason we're still playing it, even though it's sort of simple.
Yeah, and I mean, they are also, from what you're telling me, they are also like combining two things, like establishing the universe and also making use of the sound. Like you say, every time you look at a ghost, that you hear this sound, and that could be any sound. Like it doesn't have to be a good sound. It's just this is what happens when you look at a ghost, and now you're invested in their universe. So yeah, it's a great example.
Love that. It's been fantastic to play with my siblings. We all have different personalities. The oldest sibling loves to antagonize the ghost because they actually have a name and voice recognition. So theoretically, it gets mad at you when you say its name. So he loves to just run in and swear at it, and it's a lot of fun. All right,
Yeah.
we have Rick on stage for our first community question. Rick, would you like to shoot it off for us?
Hey, John. So in the event listing for this, they were talking about the documentary that you did that focused on indie game developers, and I was curious how you went about finding the developers that you wanted to showcase, and how did you choose what you were going to cover in that documentary?
And do you want to make a documentary about the Indie Game Academy, and probably Rick in particular?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was actually like a very long process of finding the right people, but the process was made much easier by the fact that there were so many game developers at Spelkollektivet when I got there. So it was James, the founder, who told me like this might be an interesting person to you, and I would do an interview. I would maybe shoot a scene with them, uh, just to see like how they work on camera, and then you also have to evaluate like what is their story and what can this story become. Because in documentary you can never know exactly what's going to happen. Like there is a writing process in documentary, but the writing process is basically this is what I hope will happen. So I got these examples of people that I think might be interesting, and some of them left the house before I could like continue their story. So that's one reason why I wouldn't continue with someone. But mainly it was um, I would start filming. I would see if I could see the connection between their past and what they are doing now and what might happen to them in the future. And just, yeah, I don't want to say hoping for the best, but at some point you have to like also decide this is the person I'm going to follow, and I will do my best to give their story justice. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. That's interesting. So it sounds like you had a bunch of indie devs and you just started with them, and whichever story would be good from the documentary perspective, you've on them.
Yeah, you disappeared for a second there, but I think I understood your question. But yeah, that's exactly how I did. I think I have interviews with, I guess, 10 plus people. And there were 4 of them who ended up in the documentary. And some people I only recorded with them once, and some people I actually followed for a while before I realized that to make the film justice, maybe I will have to cut their story out, and that's a hard decision to make. And it's a difficult conversation to have with people, but it's just part of the job, basically.
Yeah. So did that process when you were did that kind of uncover what you chose to cover, whether it was personal struggles or technical success, the way that the game was received when it launched, etc.?
Yeah, it was like I had like before when I wrote the movie, I had a plan of having someone who would be more technical than the other people, like something that would be interesting mainly to other game devs. Um, and that, I mean, there's elements of that, but it didn't really end up in the movie because I felt like a topic of this documentary is like the struggles of trying to achieve your dreams, and all of the four stories we are following is about that, basically.
Awesome. Rick, I've got,
Excellent.
as always, Rick is our chief question asker. He makes a whole, he just mentioned that he's
Oh,
the
cool.
question mill for this podcast, which is actually true. Rick, since we got you up here and we got a whole mill's worth of questions from you, you want to ask a second one?
Yeah. So as a person who is a professional filmmaker and also very familiar with games, what are the ways that you think that games should differ from a film experience?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's also like an important distinction to make. Like you in film, I would say that you have limitations that you don't have in games, and vice versa, of course. But games are a different way to tell stories, and I think the games are shouldn't try to be like films, and films shouldn't try to be like games, because people want different things. Like it's the same. I mean, you could, if it didn't matter, then you could read the script instead of watching a movie, for example. And in when I play a game, I want to be more invested in the story that I'm going to follow than if I watch a movie or read a book. Like I'm asking you to put the interactive element in my hands so I can shape the story, or I can at least have a feeling of shaping the story. So yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I have always felt like this sort of core promise of a video game over any other art form, over any other storytelling medium, is exactly that: is the sense of autonomy. Um, I love telling the story of my younger sibling who played Mass Effect and got to a point where two of the important party members died at the same moment because of choices they made earlier in the campaign, and they were just like devastated, obviously. Um, and it was their fault, air quotes that you can't see, listeners, that happened. And a movie can't make you feel like that. It's not your
No,
fault that somebody dies in a movie.
no,
A book can't
exactly.
make you feel like that, like, unless you're doing one of those good old choose your own adventures, I guess. um, all right, we're going to do question of the day. So this is where we reiterate one of the most important things we learned from Jonathan. And the first person to answer this question will get 3 House Cup points towards the coveted House Cup. This one should be easy. What are the 3 pillars of cinematography, according to Jonathan Dueck? Leave them in the chat for us. If you're listening, speak them out loud. Nice. Cheru nails it. Storytelling, world building, and sound or audio. Cheru, let us know who you want to give those House Cup points to. All right. Our next community question is Misha. Misha, would you like to come on stage and ask your question live?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Interesting perspectives for sure. I also actually, aside from working in indie games, I've also worked a little bit in animation last year, so I'm familiar at least with the production process to a degree. But regarding the recent films that have been kind of adapted from games and maybe vice versa, what have you seen as effective ways of this transmedia kind of um, thing between games and film and animation? Because I know we've noticed how like the Sonic and the Mario movies kind of have at least done it pretty well, but maybe ones like Assassin's Creed not as much, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I think if you compare those movies, I think the main difference between them is that the filmmakers really put the time in to understand what made those games special, which I don't think was the case with Assassin's Creed. I think they saw all these cinematic fighting scenes basically, and they thought that this would work well in a movie. But I mean, the fighting is a big part of Assassin's Creed, but there's fighting in a lot of games. It's not the reason why you play Assassin's Creed. Whereas in Sonic, I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the animated series, which like it adds a lot to a game where there's not a lot of dialogue and there's not a lot of scenes. There's like Sonic running around, and still they made a much better movie because they captured the essence of who Sonic is, why we like him, and also of course you have to integrate like the storytelling. There needs to be a good story, and
Seems
you
like
can borrow that. Sorry, yeah.
it seems like they really actually nailed the second pillar that you're talking about here, where they stuck to the rules of the universe. They really did the research, understood the universe of Sonic, why players and people love Sonic, and then stuck to those rules and reinforced them better than the first movie did.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the main reason why the others haven't worked. Like they've seen elements of the game they think are cool and would work in a movie, and they just kind of made a movie about them instead of actually making a movie about the game.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Misha.
Thank you.
All right. Next question is from Joker of Aces. Joker has asked me to read it for them. For audio SFX, do you prefer making them manually IRL or getting them digitally? There are plenty of movies and games with behind the scenes of them making their own SFX, but now there are so many SFX packs, it makes me wonder if manual with a microphone is actually necessary.
Yeah, that's also a very good question, and it's something that also happened during my career as a filmmaker. Like in the beginning, I would do every sound with a microphone, and then it evolved into like I almost never use a microphone. I use a lot of field recordings, but I don't actually go out and like make Foley sound where I like step on leaves to get the right feel, because there's so much on the internet, and I don't know which one is better really. I think both of them are good options. I think if you have a lot of knowledge and you're really good at audio, then you should probably record it yourself. But if you're like me, I'm not great with audio. Like I understand the basics and I do it a lot for editing. But it just makes the entire process so much easier for me, and probably better too if I buy good packs, and they're usually like kind of affordable. But I would say a mix of both, really. Like if you're looking for a very specific sound and you feel like that's very important to your game, then you should probably go out and record it, because it's not a huge undertaking to record some good sounds, and it can pay off a lot.
It seems like the answer to this is a similar answer to a lot of different assets, which is sort of twofold. Like the first part is you as an individual contributor, so in this case, like an SFX artist, are going to be just good at different types of sounds. You're going to have a skill set that complements a specific kind of work. And that doesn't mean only do that one skill set, but that means like, yeah, that's the one to lean into probably. The second answer seems like, as always, a balance of what fits the game best and then what fits the budget best. If I don't have enough time to make a bunch of sound effects, then maybe, yeah, one cheap SFX pack is like perfect. Versus if I have the time and the skill, I can go and make a bunch of really cool Foley sound and really make this game sound unique.
Yeah, it's just about trying to understand the limitations of what you're doing. And yeah, it's a big part of making a film, and I guess games too, is to understand the scope of what you're trying to do, really.
All right, we have time for probably one more question. Somehow Rick found his way back on the stage. Rick, do you want to ask a third question?
Yeah. So I love how you have a lot of focus on narrative, because narrative is one of the hardest things to get right in game design. There's the way that the player experiences it, and just conveying a proper story. So I'm curious, what are some big mistakes that you think people make when trying to tell a story in a game?
I think a big mistake is when you really try to copy film. There's like a lot of good examples of that from games in the like 2010s, I guess, where you're out running with your character and suddenly the character starts to walk, and then you have these letter boxes coming down, and suddenly it's in CinemaScope, and they're saying now we are making something cinematic for you, and you're completely taken out of the game. Like now you're watching a short film all of a sudden. And I mean, of course cinematics sometimes have their place in a game, but most of the time I think, at least to me, I would rather not have the cinematic, um, because like it takes me out of the immersion, and like I said before, like I'm here to play a game. I'm not here to watch a movie. And you know, it's nuanced as well, of course. Like sometimes it's really necessary. Like in World of Warcraft, they are making good use of it. Like there are breaks in a boss fight where you need to watch a cinematic for the boss fight to progress. And in that case, I mean, yeah, there should probably be a cinematic because it would be very hard to translate to a game. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad examples of it as well, where you're just trying to copy what's cinematic in a film and put it in a game.
I think there's cases where that works, and cases where it's like really impressive even. Like I feel like the most recent Spider-Man game, Spider-Man 2, had a lot of that. All of the Last of Us, all of the Uncharted, those all have like really powerful cinematics. But my favorite example in recent cinematic history, and I'm being biased because it's the first time in like 10 years, is one of my top 5 games, is Baldur's Gate 3 again. I feel like they did a fantastic job of not getting in your face and having an absolute maximum number of like input moments. So it's very rare for them to be doing some kind of cinematic where the player isn't making a choice every like 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And I think that is like maximizing how players expect to play a game while still getting some of the awesome cinematography that we love from film.
Yeah, and that's a great example. Like that's a good idea that they had. That like you are watching a movie, but it's also sort of interactive, which has also it has been tried, but the other way around. Like we saw the Netflix movies like Black Mirror, where they tried to make an interactive experience. To me, it didn't work at all. It works in games, but in when I was watching a movie, it just became a nuisance. Like I didn't want to make those choices because I'm here watching a movie. But like you say, in Baldur's Gate 3, it works really well, and I think it was very smart of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
I
feel
totally
called
agree.
out because that I have been guilty of creating that exact kind of system you're describing. And I will say from playtesting, the most important mechanic I added to that system was the skip button.
Yeah.
I think
No,
having played, yeah,
Thank you.
like, go ahead. I think a couple of like interactive elements really help that kind of thing. Like even if it's just like, you know, a quick time button to make the plane land correctly in your cinematic or something like that. Just something to like reward the player for the promise of this being an interactive video game, you know.
yeah.
Um, all right, awesome. So we are at the end of the episode, but before we say goodbye, we like to do 2 things here. So first of all, Jonathan, what is a piece of homework that we can assign to the listeners that'll take about an hour that they can do in the next week to practice some of what we talked about here today?
Yeah, I think the first one would be about all the, I don't know if you call them scenes in games, but I say scenes when I watch something. Like I'm here and then I'm there. Like that's a scene to me. To map out all the scenes and just like being very honest to yourself and saying, can I actually put a but or therefore between them? Or am I just saying and then this happens, and then this happens? So that would be the first one. And the second one is like I'm sure a lot of people already did it, but like and we do this in film as well. Like we make a document of this is the world that we have, and actually writing down all the rules of that universe, and like reference that document every time you're unsure of a decision. Like should I do this or should I do that? The answer is in the world building document, basically. So yeah, that would
I
be
love
the
it.
two.
There's going to be a bunch of those. I'm excited to see those. So, as always, for homework here, we've got 2 places for you to share them. We want you to do the homework. Challenge yourself to do the homework. This is how we learn and grow. So, spend about an hour thinking about scenes in your games and adding a but or therefore to connect to the next scene. Maybe do like 3 or 4 of those so we have a little bit of a story flow. And then also create or share a world building document. I know y'all, and I know that a lot of y'all already have at least the beginnings of a world building doc. So please share them for us. You can drop them on LinkedIn and tag the Indie Game Academy as well as Jonathan Dueck and myself, Willem Delventhal, and we'll perhaps take a look and give you some feedback. Or if you're feeling like that's a little bit too much for you, in the Discord on the Indie Game Lunch Hour channel, there is a thread for every episode. So you can also drop it in Discord if you want it to be a little bit more intimate. All right, before we say goodbye, Jonathan, any last words of wisdom or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode?
Oh, words of wisdom. I wish I had some. I don't know. I think we're in a world where there's a lot of individualism going on, and just remember that you don't always have to elbow your way forward. Try to help each other as much as possible, and it's despite all the stories we hear, it's possible to move forward while being nice. And also watch the documentary. I think you as indie devs will like it.
What is the name of the documentary?
It's Spelkollektivet to build a castle.
Spiel Collective to build a castle. It literally does sound like us. Or one day we will be in a IRL castle. Right now we only have a virtual castle, but we'll get there. Awesome. We will link that documentary down below, so check it out. And do your homework, everybody. And you got this. You can be nice. It is a superpower. You don't have to be a jerk.
Exactly.
Wise final words. All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here and giving us some perspective into cinematics in our games. And thank you for answering
Thank you
all
so
our
much
questions.
for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you to those who asked questions and to those who listened. As always, we ask that if you have somebody in mind who might benefit from this episode, that you send it along to them for us. Just one person who might also enjoy listening to this episode. All right, that's going to do it. We'll be here again in Discord next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We're here every single week, so find those join links down below. You can ask your own questions live of the next guest. All right, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for your time.